I remember the first time I truly felt lost in my own life. Everything around me seemed urgent: meetings, plans, responsibilities, and yet, inside, I was empty, restless, searching for something I couldn't name. I tried meditation apps, breathing exercises, even journaling, but nothing seemed to settle the storm inside. One evening, I stumbled across a quiet quote online: "Zen is the practice of no practice." At first, it sounded paradoxical, almost nonsensical. How could not practicing be a practice at all? Curiosity tugged at me, a gentle whisper that I couldn't ignore. The next day, I found myself walking through a small park near my apartment. The world was alive with sounds: the distant hum of traffic, the rustle of leaves in the wind, birds calling to each other. I had no destination in mind, no goal, and yet I felt the strange sensation of presence, as if the world itself was asking me to notice it, to simply be. That's when I realized, perhaps Zen wasn't about doing anything, about striving or achieving. Maybe it was about letting go, about allowing life to unfold without interference. I sat on a bench, eyes half closed, and noticed my thoughts. They came and went like clouds, each one claiming importance, demanding attention, yet slipping away on its own. I didn't chase them. I didn't push them away. I simply noticed. A deep calm started to emerge, not earned, just present. For the first time in years, I felt a breath of peace that didn't come from completing a task or checking a box. It came from doing nothing. The more I lingered in that quiet awareness, the more I realized how much of life I had been missing. I had believed that peace was somewhere out there in the future, in some accomplishment, in some perfect circumstance. But here it was, quietly waiting, embedded in the simplest act of noticing, in the simplest act of being. This was the essence of the practice of no practice. It wasn't about mastery or ritual. It was about presence, about embracing life as it is, without resistance, without judgment, without effort. In that moment, I also understood why people often struggle with Zen. It's not flashy. It doesn't promise miracles or instant happiness. It doesn't require chanting, sitting for hours, or renouncing the world. Instead, it asks something far subtler: to trust the stillness within, to let go of the compulsion to control, to allow life to breathe through you. And as I sat there, feeling the slow rhythm of my own heartbeat, I began to sense a tiny, profound shift. The chaos inside me softened, and I realized that the path to deep rest, the kind that reaches into your bones, may not lie in relentless striving, but in the gentle surrender of effort itself. I left the park that evening with no grand revelations, but I carried a small seed of understanding. Zen, I learned, is less about learning and more about unlearning. Less about doing and more about allowing. And somewhere, deep inside, I knew that this seed, once nurtured, could grow into a quiet, unwavering peace that I had been searching for all my life. After that evening in the park, I became curious. If Zen was about presence and letting go, what did that really mean in practical terms? I started reading, listening, and observing, and slowly, the core teachings began to reveal themselves, not as rules, but as gentle invitations to notice life more fully. One of the first things I understood was that Zen doesn't ask you to become someone you are not. It doesn't offer a checklist of spiritual achievements or demand perfection. Instead, it asks you to meet yourself exactly where you are, without judgment. That was revolutionary for me. All my life, I had been striving to fix myself, to chase an idea of who I thought I should be. Zen quietly suggested a different approach, acceptance, as a doorway to freedom. The second lesson I encountered was the nature of impermanence. I used to resist change, cling to comfort, and fear the unknown. But Zen teaches that everything is in constant flux. Thoughts, emotions, circumstances, even the sense of self that I cling to are fleeting. I began to see my worries and frustrations as passing clouds, temporary shapes in the sky of my mind. The more I observed them without grasping, the less they controlled me. It was as if a door had opened, showing me that peace was not a destination, but a space between each thought. A moment that exists right now, always available if I simply allow myself to notice it. I also learned that Zen values direct experience over intellectual understanding. I could read hundreds of books, listen to countless teachings, but until I practiced presence, the essence remained abstract. Zen encourages curiosity, not to accumulate knowledge, but to awaken awareness. So, I started small, observing my breath, feeling my feet on the ground, listening to the rhythm of life around me. Each moment became a tiny meditation, each breath a teacher. I noticed the subtle interplay between stillness and movement, silence and sound, doing and non-doing. In that awareness, life felt richer, more immediate, and strangely lighter. Another teaching that struck me was the importance of letting go of attachment, not just to objects, but to thoughts, opinions, and even the desire for peace itself. It sounds paradoxical. How can you let go of wanting to feel calm? Yet Zen shows that attachment is what creates tension, and release is what allows the mind to settle. I began experimenting with this in daily life. When anger arose, I didn't suppress it. I observed it, noticing how it moved through my body, then let it pass. When anxiety threatened to take over, I didn't fight it. I simply acknowledged it and returned to the present moment. Over time, this gentle practice began to dissolve my habitual patterns of resistance and stress. Perhaps the most subtle lesson of all was that Zen is not about attaining enlightenment as some distant goal. The practice of no practice teaches that enlightenment is already here, woven into the ordinary fabric of life. It is present in a cup of tea, a walk in the park, a moment of silence before sleep. I started to see my daily life not as distractions from a higher purpose, but as the very path itself. Even mundane tasks, washing dishes, walking to work, folding laundry, became opportunities to notice, to practice presence, to engage with life fully. The ordinary, I realized, was extraordinary when met with awareness. Through all of this, I began to understand a profound truth. Zen is not about escaping life, but about embracing it without resistance. It is a constant invitation to return to the present, to shed expectations, and to experience the simplicity and depth of now. The teachings are subtle, often contradictory, and deeply personal. They cannot be fully explained in words. They must be lived moment by moment. And as I practiced, even in small ways, I felt a quiet transformation. My mind was less tangled, my heart more open, and the relentless urgency that had dominated my life began to soften. In those days, I realized that the core of Zen is paradoxical, yet liberating. By practicing no practice, we discover the ease in effort, the calm in chaos, and the freedom in simply being. It is not something to achieve, but something to recognize, a quiet truth that waits beneath the surface of our daily thoughts, always present, always accessible. And as I continued my journey, I felt a subtle but profound shift, a sense that life, in all its complexity, could be met with grace, openness, and a gentle smile, simply because I allowed myself to be here, fully, without resistance. One afternoon, I decided to visit a small Zen monastery on the outskirts of the city. I didn't go with expectations or a checklist of what I wanted to learn. I simply wanted to observe, to immerse myself in the presence I had glimpsed before. The monastery was quiet, almost austere, with wooden floors that creaked softly underfoot, and the faint scent of incense lingering in the air. I was greeted by an elderly monk whose eyes seemed to hold a calm that I could only describe as timeless. He didn't speak much at first, but his presence alone was strangely comforting. That evening, at Khan, I joined the monks for a simple tea ceremony. The process was slow, deliberate, and yet effortless. Every movement, the way they held the cup, the way they poured the water, the way they bowed to one another, was an act of full awareness. I noticed how, even in such a simple ritual, there was depth, a profound attention to the present At one point, I accidentally spilled some tea. My instinct was to apologize profusely, to feel embarrassed, to feel that I had failed. The monks simply smiled, nodded, and continued. There was no judgment, no reaction, just the continuation of the moment. And in that, I felt something shift. Later, I asked him, "How do you remain so calm? How do you maintain this peace?" He laughed softly, a sound that was more like a ripple in the air than words. "Peace," he said, "is not something to hold on to. It is not earned or acquired. It is always here, like the space around you. You only need to notice it. You only need to stop clinging." At first, I didn't fully understand. But as the evening deepened, I began to sense what he meant. By letting go of control, by accepting the flow of life without interference, even a small measure of peace became tangible. The next morning, I walked alone in the monastery gardens. Dew still clung to the grass, and the light of early sun fell softly across the leaves. I noticed a small bird perched on a branch, preening, completely absorbed in its own being. I realized that in the same way I could exist fully in this moment without needing to fix the past or plan the future. I could simply be aware of my breath, my heartbeat, the warmth of the sun, the quiet rustle of leaves. That awareness itself felt like a doorway, opening into a vast space of calm I had never known. During my stay, each task was done with presence, without hurry or distraction. They were not trying to impress anyone, achieve some goal, or escape life's demands. Yet everything they did carried a quiet elegance, a beauty that arose naturally from attention and acceptance. It was then I realized the essence of no practice. It is not about rigid routines or striving for enlightenment. It is about living each action fully, meeting each moment without judgment, without expectation, and without resistance. On my last evening, I sat by the monastery pond, watching the reflection of the sky ripple in the water. A gentle wind stirred the surface, and for the first time, I felt that I could let go not just of thoughts and worries, but of the very need to practice Zen. I realized that all my previous attempts to control, to achieve, to force calm had been unnecessary. The moment was always enough. The pond didn't need my permission to ripple. The wind didn't need my attention to blow. And I didn't need to chase peace to experience it. It was already here, waiting quietly beneath the surface of my awareness. That night, lying on a simple mat in the monastery guest room, I closed my eyes and simply breathed. Thoughts came and went, as always, but I let them drift, ungrasped. I felt a soft, profound stillness settle over me. For the first time in my life, I understood that the depth of Zen was not in rituals, rules, or structured practice. It was in the gentle art of noticing, of allowing, of embracing the ordinary with full awareness. And in that quiet, unforced surrender, I felt a peace that did not need to be earned. Simply was by the time I left the monastery. I carried a new understanding with me. Life itself is the teacher, and the path of Zen is not found in trying harder, but in letting go, in trusting the moment, in simply being. And as I walked back into the city with its noise and hurry, I felt a calm that was unshakable, because I had finally glimpsed the simple, profound truth. Peace is always here, and it is always enough. When I returned from the monastery, I realized that the true challenge wasn't learning Zen, it was living it in the middle of everyday life. The city didn't slow down for me. Deadlines still loomed, traffic still honked, and my mind still raced. But I began experimenting with small, simple practices inspired by what I had learned. I started with my breath. Whenever I felt overwhelmed, I would pause for a single inhalation and a single exhalation, noticing the rise and fall of my chest, the subtle rhythm of life moving through me. It seemed almost too simple, but in those tiny moments, the chaos began to soften. I also learned to approach ordinary tasks differently. Washing the dishes no longer felt like a chore. Instead, I noticed the warmth of the water, the texture of the soap bubbles, the weight of each plate in my hands. Walking to work became an opportunity to feel the ground beneath my feet, to hear the ambient sounds around me, to sense the wind brushing against my skin. Each small moment became a meditation, a doorway into presence. It wasn't about doing it perfectly. It was about noticing fully, without judgment or distraction. Another practice that helped me deeply was observing my thoughts without attachment. Thoughts still came and went, worries about the future, regrets about the past, judgments about myself, but I tried not to chase them or push them away. I would watch them as if they were leaves floating on a stream. Some would linger, some would disappear, but none required my interference. Over time, I noticed a subtle freedom arising. My mind was no longer a battlefield. I could respond with clarity instead of reacting out of habit. I could choose presence over anxiety. I also experimented with short, intentional pauses during my day. I would stop for 30 seconds at my desk, closing my eyes, simply feeling my body and breathing. Or I would sit on a park bench during lunch, letting myself just be, without scrolling through my phone or planning my next task. These micro practices might seem insignificant, but cumulatively, they changed the quality of my life. I began to notice that stillness was not a luxury. It was a tool, a way to reconnect with the flow of life itself. Sometimes I even practiced no practice in conversations. I would listen fully, without planning my next response or letting my mind wander. I noticed the subtle shifts in tone, the pauses, the emotions behind the words. People responded differently too. They felt heard, understood, and somehow calmer in my presence. I realized that Zen was not just for solitude or meditation. It could be woven into every interaction, every action, every breath. One evening, I tried a guided doing nothing meditation before bed. I lay on my mat, closed my eyes, and simply allowed sensations to arise and pass the weight of my body against the floor. The sound of distant traffic, the rhythm of my heartbeat. When thoughts intruded, I didn't resist them. I simply returned to awareness of the body, the breath, the present moment. By the end of 10 minutes, I felt a profound release. Sleep came naturally, deeply, and without struggle. I realized that Zen could bring rest not just to the mind, but to the body and heart as well. Over time, these practices became a subtle, continuous thread in my daily life. I didn't need special equipment, long retreats, or complex rituals. All I needed was awareness, presence, and a willingness to allow life to unfold. Even in moments of stress or uncertainty, I could find a still point within myself, a place untouched by chaos, a calm that was always accessible. Through these daily experiments, I understood that Zen is not a set of rules, it is a living practice. It is flexible, adaptable, and deeply personal. Each of us can discover our own ways to embody presence in movement, in stillness, in thought, and in action. And as I practiced, I felt life shift beneath my feet. I was not changing the world outside. I was learning to meet it with openness, clarity, and grace. This is the essence of the practice of no practice. To live fully, to notice fully, to allow fully. The extraordinary is found in the ordinary, and peace is discovered not by creating it, but by recognizing that it has always been here. Patiently waiting within the quiet space of now. Each day, with every breath, I was learning to return to that space, to carry its calm into every corner of my life, and to remember that the simplest act of being can be the most profound form of practice. As I sit here, reflecting on this journey, I realize that Zen is not a destination, but a companion, quietly guiding us back to the present moment whenever we drift. The calm I once thought I had to chase externally was never truly out there. It was always within me, waiting for recognition. Each breath, each sensation, each fleeting thought is an invitation to return home to ourselves. I want to emphasize this because it's easy to get lost in the idea that peace is something we must achieve, something we earn. But Zen teaches a different truth. Peace is always here. We only need to notice it. I've come to understand that the practice of no practice is paradoxical, yet profoundly freeing. It asks us not to control, not to perfect, not to constantly strive, Instead, it asks for present, simple, unwavering, unadorned attention to the life unfolding around and within us. Whether it's sipping a cup of tea, walking down a familiar street, or simply lying in bed at the end of a long day, there is a quiet richness available if we let ourselves fully inhabit these moments. Even our struggles, anxieties, and mistakes become part of the path, as long as we meet them with awareness and compassion. I encourage you to experiment with small steps. Notice your breath, even for a minute. Listen deeply when someone speaks. Watch thoughts rise and fall without clinging. Allow life to flow without interference. These micro-practices are not mere exercises. They are the doorway into presence, the bridge between a restless mind and a peaceful heart. Over time, these moments accumulate like drops of water filling a still pond, creating a profound, sustaining calm. And if you feel resistance, if you doubt that this doing nothing approach can work, remember my own journey. I was skeptical too. I had tried countless techniques and felt constantly inadequate. Yet, it was in surrendering the need to control, in allowing life to be as it is, that I discovered a peace deeper than I had imagined. Zen is patient. It doesn't rush. It doesn't judge. It simply offers itself moment by moment and invites us to return to what has always been here. As you explore this path, I want you to know that Zen is not about perfection or strict discipline. It's about embracing your own rhythm, your own pace, your own way of noticing life. Some days will be easier than others. Some moments will feel chaotic, and some will feel exquisitely still. All of it is part of the practice. The point is not to achieve a particular state, but to awaken to the reality of now. This realization, once felt, has the power to transform ordinary life into something extraordinary. So, take a breath now. Feel it. Let it remind you that presence is always available. You don't need a special place, a special time, or a special technique. You need only to notice, to allow, to return again and again to this moment. Carry this awareness into your day, into your conversations, into your actions, and see how the world shifts not because it changes, but because you meet it differently. If this journey has resonated with you, I invite you to explore it further. Try a few minutes of mindful breathing. Notice your surroundings, or simply sit quietly and observe. Share your experience with others, and if you feel moved, continue to explore Zen teachings, meditations, and reflections. And of course, if this video has brought you a moment of calm, consider subscribing so you can continue walking this path together, step by step, breath by breath. Remember, peace is not far away. It is not earned or bought. It is here within your own awareness, patiently waiting for your attention. Let yourself rest in it. Let yourself be fully present, and as you do, you may discover that the simplest act of all, simply being, is the most profound practice you will ever know.